6 grants for Turkish language study. Elise graduated from UIUC in 2011 and conducts research involving around the intersection of human geography and language and education policy and planning processes, internationalization and education policy production and reform, internationalization of higher education, and program evaluation with a focus on Turkey and Central Asia. So let's give a round to Elise.
Great, thanks Matthew for that introduction. It's a lot of lists, and so it's a little bit of a mouthful. Thanks everybody, and thanks to Wesley and to Felicia for the invitation to be able to share a little bit about kind of my journey. You know that the focus in this session is on private sector and academia, and I think because I've had both faculty and administrator roles, I think there was Felicia was sharing that there might be some folks who might be interested in that type of career path. And so what I'll basically do is just share a little bit about kind of the role that language has played in terms of my career, and kind of how it's informed different decisions that I've made, and then kind of wrap up with a couple maybe reflections or learnings that I've taken away from my own journey. And so kind of conclude like that. So I'll be pretty brief in my remarks. But just to kind of get us started, I wanted to start with a quote from a sociologist of language, Robert Cooper, who wrote this comments. He wrote in his book on language planning and policy, you know, language is the foundational institution that we encounter. And I remember reading that when I was in graduate school and being so struck by that kind of observation, that language is really this, like, the first set of kind of like man-made or like kind of constructed rules and systems that we encounter as we navigate the world from birth. And that's kind of really stayed with me in terms of informing my perspective about the foundational nature of language, not just like language learning, but in terms of thinking about access to systems, etc. But I wanted to start off with that because I think that was something that was really formative in informing my perspective in terms of my research as well as my work today. As Matthew mentioned, so when I was in graduate school, I was really fortunate enough to receive different types of FLAS awards to be able to study Turkish for a number of years, and eventually wrote my dissertation on language and education change in Turkey. But the reason, or the kind of like initial precipitating event that got me interested in learning Turkish was actually just through backpacking through Germany. So when I was starting my graduate program, I was backpacking through Germany kind of before a linguistics institute. And this is, you know, back in the early 2000s, before the internet was the internet that we know today. So I had like my guidebook and, you know, that was pretty much it. And, you know, I was like backpacking around and I just noticed that there were a lot of Turkish people in Germany. My research at that point was looking at the reunification of East and West Germany, comparing that to North and South Korea. And I was just really curious, like, why are there so many Turkish people in Germany? And then did a little bit more digging and learned a little bit more about post-World War II reconstruction, labor migration, etc. And I just was really struck by kind of that history, thought it was interesting, and then didn't really think much more of that later, like throughout the summer. I came back home after that summer, and I was sharing with my mom about kind of like all the different things I had learned, and also about Turkish labor migration. And she had made this kind of like offhand, passing comments about how for people who know Korean, it's easy to learn Turkish. My mother wasn't a linguist, and so she wasn't kind of like speaking to the technical aspect of language learning. But again, when I did a little bit more digging, realizing that both Turkish and Korean are Uralic languages, and they share certain morphosyntactic features, you know, it was like, oh, that's really interesting. You know, I didn't really, you know, I never thought about Turkish and Korean being kind of in the same language family, etc. But again, thought nothing of it. When I came back to U of I for the fall semester, I remember walking through our foreign language building, and there was a flyer that said, hey, like, we're offering Turkish, first year Turkish for the first time in a while. And, you know, I just kind of felt like, wow, the universe is kind of encouraging me to learn Turkish, you know? And so in some ways, kind of in that in a series of serendipitous events, I started learning Turkish. But that's actually wound up being very pivotal to actually the whole trajectory of my career, because not only did I start learning Turkish at that point, it was really informative. It was kind of foundational to being able to, apply for FLAS fellowships, which allowed me to be able to study Turkish both on campus, but then also in intensive summer programs like many of you. It also actually provided a connection to getting my Fulbright. So I was at a conference later in my graduate career, and I was, in different sessions about language policy and stuff. And one of the faculty members who was presenting was from a university in the Netherlands, who also happened to kind of look at Turkish migration in the Netherlands. After the kind of one of the sessions, I went up to him, introduced myself, and kind of in my third year Turkish language kind of learning way, introduced myself in Turkish, and he was kind of surprised, because why is there this Korean American kind of introducing themselves to him, and it kind of made a little bit of an impression. Later on, it turned out that I needed a sponsor for my Fulbright. And so I reached out to this faculty member and was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I was the Korean American who introduced myself to you, speaking in Turkish. And I'm in the process of applying for a Fulbright Schumann Award. Would you consider being a sponsor for my Fulbright Award? And he was like, of course I remember you. And they were willing to sponsor my Fulbright Award, and I was really fortunate to be able to receive that grant. Later, in terms of when I started writing my dissertation, although my original dissertation topic itself was a little bit different, eventually I landed on winding up writing about language and education reform in Turkey, and that was really kind of because I started learning Turkish at that point almost like 6 years prior. So that was kind of like, learning Turkish was actually really foundational to my graduate experience. Even though, when I first started learning Turkish at the time, I hadn't anticipated that. That wasn't kind of my plan. I was actually originally looking at a different region, et cetera. And it was kind of almost on a whim that I started learning Turkish. Kind of thinking about the second phase of my career then, after as I was preparing to graduate, as a number of you are in different graduate programs, sometimes your committee will say, hey, we want you to expand the scope of your study. Have you considered looking at X, Y, and Z? And so, in deference to my committee, while I was writing my dissertation, I did expand the scope of my topic to look at kind of language and education reform in 21st century Turkey. And in the course of studying kind of that, or the more recent, more contemporary Turkey, became aware of kind of Turkey's dynamic in post-Soviet Turkic Central Asia. And I thought that was really interesting. And I was really looking to maybe consider, looking at that dynamic between Turkey and post-Soviet Central Asia as kind of this post-dissertation research agenda. And as I was getting ready to graduate, there was a job posting at KİMEP University in Almaty, and it was a really interesting job posting. And I remember thinking, I was kind of anticipating or intending to look more like 5 or 6 years down the road before maybe delving into this interest in Central Asia, but maybe this is an opportunity to be able to really kind of get a sense of how language and education reform is taking place in Kazakhstan right now. And this was back in 2011. Again, I applied for the job and I was really fortunate to be hired as kind of a cohort of a number of faculty members who came in that fall. And again, while in this case, learning Turkish wasn't kind of directly relevant to getting the position, I mean, the studying of Turkish kind of opened up these different opportunities to be able to then kind of, in some ways, serendipitously become interested in a different region that had, different types of ties, and then, kind of open that door as well. Finally, just kind of talking about after coming back to the States, I was in Almaty for about 5 years. had to come back to the States, or came back to the States, and was working initially as a consultant at UW-Madison, or with UW-Madison, on a partnership that UW has with Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, and was invited to apply for the position that I have today, which is the director of the International Projects Office, in part because of both my linguistic and also kind of my regional familiarity. And so again, I think, learning Turkish in a way didn't necessarily like open that, wasn't directly kind of relevant to the job I hold right now, but it has been really critical in terms of kind of like opening different opportunities because of the experience that it's proffered. And so I guess just to kind of like wrap up, I think some of the things that I've taken away from that is, one, I think a lot of times when we think about language learning, a lot of times there's a sense of I'm investing all of this time and effort into this, and there's increasingly less, like fewer and fewer funding opportunities. There's oftentimes, in particularly U.S. higher education institutions, not that much value for faculty who are multilingual or plurilingual. And I think it's really important to not just think about language learning from kind of a purely utilitarian perspective, but also really thinking about it from like the different types of networking opportunities that it opens up, and the different networks that it connects all of us to, because language learning kind of transcends kind of our disciplinary boundaries, kind of our even kind of like areas of interest, by connecting us to different people who share this interest either in a particular region or country, et cetera. And so really thinking about language learning and the language learning opportunities that we have as kind of this kind of a way of expanding our communities of practice or networking opportunities, I think seeing that has been really helpful for me in terms of kind of like offering different career opportunities, and also kind of in some ways being able to justify language learning, because sometimes it feels a little bit self-indulgent, or it's like, where is this going to go? Is it knowledge for knowledge sake? But I think that if we think about language as a way of connecting with different people foundationally, going back to that Robert Cooper quote, I think that's definitely at least been the experience for me, really been trying to be ready and open and available to make the most of those opportunities to connect with people. The second thing that I think I've learned, or just kind of reflecting on just my language learning journey, I think is trying to be flexible. And so oftentimes I think, particularly for those of us who are kind of pursuing an academic career, there's kind of a prescribed notion of what an academic career should be. I think it's really important to kind of think about what is it about academia or kind of this particular career path that kind of drew you into this kind of, into this journey to begin with. And then maybe being open to thinking about what the container of that could look like. When I was on the job market initially back in 2011, the job market was pretty terrible. Like, we were coming out of the 2008 global recession. My field, which is comparative and international education, had pretty much been completely defunded. And so there was like 3 positions globally that were open for people in my field. And so, for me, I think I was thinking about, what am I really interested in? And, without looking at kind of the packaging of it, how can I do that work? And so I think that was something that was really helpful for me when I was on the job market. It has been helpful for me in thinking about and making different types of career choices, but can be really challenging, especially for those of us who are, kind of really, maybe you're an advanced, a doctoral student, can really receiving a lot of pressure to pursue a tenure track position, although I think that's been really changing in more recent years. But I think being flexible and thinking about what is it that you like to do, or what is it I like to do, as opposed to kind of the form or the container by which I want to do that work, I think is really helpful in terms of at least freeing up thinking about like different avenues for being able to do work. And so I think one, I guess, kind of like thing that I heard recently that I was kind of inspired by in an interview with Stephen Yuen on I don't know if anybody listens to the podcast, Conan Needs a Friend, but he was interviewing Stephen Yuen, and Stephen Yuen was talking about, how, they were talking about his career and the career choices that he's made. And, he was asked, would you have imagined that you would have the opportunities that you do when you were coming up in Second City? And he was kind of making the comment that, the entertainment industry isn't made for someone like me. It's not made for people like me. And, you know, it's really required being flexible, being creative, and thinking about, you know, like this idea of like, what do I like? What do I want to do? As opposed to, like, it has to, the outworking of that needs to be implemented in a certain type of way. And I just really appreciated that coming from, you know, a creative person, and thinking about even kind of a pursuit in academia as kind of a creative, in some ways, kind of artistic pursuit, as opposed to kind of how we sometimes kind of get fixated on thinking about it, which is kind of this really like scholarly academic pursuit. But, you know, in its core, you know, academia and the scholarship that we're engaging in is really creative and artistic in a sense. And so, I don't know, I just wanted to, I guess, you know, leave kind of like conclude with a brief pop culture reference, but was encouraged to kind of hear people from like other sectors also sharing kind of the challenges of trying to navigate institutions and kind of like job markets that might not necessarily feel like they're designed for people who have these types of interests. But again, I think that, you know, it really involves or requires being creative and reflective and thinking about what is it that, you know, you want to do, and, you know, not necessarily kind of looking for that job title or the industry that seems to be like the most obvious. So I'm happy to kind of go into any other detail as the panels pursue or go on, but hope that was helpful in some way.
Thank you, Dr. An. Fantastic presentation. Now we move on to communication strategist at Khan Academy, Hailey Dickson. So, Hailey manages external communications and produces digital content for Khan Academy, a nonprofit providing free education to over 130 million learners across 190 languages and 50 languages. Hailey works to promote education as a human right and expand access to free education in the US, India, and around the world. Her study of Hindi, Urdu, and Farsi have helped to expand Khan Academy's presence in India, as well as to deliver math and science curricula to girls banned from education in Afghanistan. Prior to working at Khan Academy, Hailey worked on digital media partnerships for UNICEF South Asia and as a community manager for UVA, a mental health awareness platform based in Mumbai. She is an alumnus of the CLS, Boren, and Fulbright scholarship programs. Hailey received her bachelor's in bioanthropology and global health and master's in human rights practice from the University of Arizona. So without further ado, take it away, Hailey.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here, and I just love talking about language and how it factors into career with like-minded individuals. So I'm really excited that everyone here is on this journey. And I especially love what Elise was saying about how these language skills enable you to think about your career and your impact in creative ways and kind of forge your own track in a way you might not be able to be otherwise. So I'm looking forward to speaking on that, and I'm about to share my screen. I have some slides to show you. Can everyone see and hear me okay? Okay. All right. So I'm working in the private nonprofit sector at Khan Academy, but I think that my role is a nice bridge between the public sector and academia. And so I'd love to speak on that and how my language skills have enabled me to drive an impact and also work within my passions in those three areas. So I work as an international communications strategist, and I currently work for Khan Academy. Just by show of hands, has anyone here used Khan Academy before? Yeah. Okay, so my education background, in general, I've always been interested in science communications, media, and education as a human right. I went into my undergrad on the pre-med track thinking that I wanted to work in global health And so I did my Bachelor's of Science in Bioanthropology and Global Health and Development. And during that time, I studied abroad in India during my third year, doing both a Hindi and a public health course. And at that time, when I was learning in the field about different public health initiatives, I started thinking more about how I could drive an impact in the field of public health, and particularly in mental health, not just by going into a clinical setting, but by using my communication skills, which I felt like were becoming my unique asset to really reach a lot more people. So that became a perspective that I tried to maintain as I built my career from my undergrad. So after my undergrad, I did a Fulbright research grant in Mumbai, focused on digital communications and mental health advocacy. I partnered with both a nonprofit and a private media organization there for that project. And after 1 year of conducting research with their support, I was hired by that media company and worked there for 2 more years. And then I came back to the US and I did my master's in human rights practice with the University of Arizona. And I focused on information and communications technology in South Asia and using it for equity of access to education and public health awareness. And here's a picture of some of my research work while I was in India, which I'm about to speak more about. So my language background, I started college and I enrolled in a Hindi course because I had decided that I wanted to work in global health. I wanted to study a lesser taught language, and I wanted to speak a language that was very widely spoken so that if I were to go into the public health field, I would have more scope for impact. So I signed up for a Hindi class at the University of Arizona. Only 3 students enrolled. The class was held in a dorm room and it got canceled after 2 weeks because no one but me showed up. So I started looking for other opportunities to learn the language, which is how I came to know about CLS and other federally funded language opportunities. So I got my first CLS award in the summer of 2015 after my freshman year in college. And I studied in Jaipur for a summer. And in that summer, I was able to learn really quickly. I went from not knowing any Hindi to being intermediate mid in 1 summer. And that really drove my momentum into changing my course of study throughout the rest of my undergrad. So a year and a half later, I returned to India as a junior for a Boren scholarship. And the summer preceding that year, I spent 2 months studying Hindi at UW-Madison's Safely summer program. And then I transitioned into a fall semester at AIIS India. And then for my spring Boren, I studied in Manipal University in South India doing a public health program there. And then after I graduated 2 years later, I returned to India again on a Fulbright research grant. And during that time, I received a supplementary award to study Urdu and Marathi in Mumbai in conjunction with my research grant. And both those languages helped with my field research in Mumbai and getting a little bit more engaged with very local communities there. I've really run the gamut of federally funded language opportunities. So I use my Hindi and Urdu knowledge to transition into a class with Urdu at UW-Madison in 2020. And then last year, I transitioned from Urdu to Persian with one more CLS Virtual Institute program. And I really found that my Hindi directly helped me transition into learning Urdu. And then my knowledge of Urdu, which shares a script with Persian, helped me learn Persian. And that sequence of learning languages was really doable for me. And I'll speak later about how I think one should not be overwhelmed by the prospect of trying to incorporate multiple languages into your career. So I wanted to add that language learning is a skill that builds on itself. So even just the skill of learning a language will apply to other things as you learn more languages or you learn other skills in your life. So when you're learning a language, keep an eye on what helps you best, both pedagogically, take note of what works for you, and then you can really use that to build on your own language skills and pitch other skills as you go into the job market. So here's a little more about my work history. While I was an undergrad, after I had returned from my first year studying in India, I worked for the International Rescue Committee, which is a refugee settlement organization in Tucson, Arizona. And there I coordinated healthcare for recently resettled refugees. And I specifically did some translation work for Pakistani and Afghan refugees using my Urdu and minimal Farsi at the time. And then after I graduated, I moved to Madison again for a summer where I was a Hindi teaching assistant for elementary Hindi. And then right after that, I began my Fulbright research grant in India. And then in between that, I did my master's. At the end of my master's, as like a work-based capstone, I partnered with UNICEF South Asia, analyzing some of their partnerships with media companies in South Asia and their corporate social responsibility and the outcomes of their projects. And then I used all of that experience after I graduated to get this current job I work in at Khan Academy, where I've been working for a little over a year now. And this is a picture of the documentary team that I worked with at the media company in Mumbai. I wanted to exemplify that even academic research can take different forms. So rather than partnering with an academic institution, I partnered with both a nonprofit and a media company. And I literally lived in a bus and I traveled with this media crew around India doing my interviews. And it was the most enriching experience in terms of building my communication skills. So how language shaped my research journey. Knowing that I always had this passion for communications that was further fueled by the language skills I've been working so hard to build, I wanted to conduct my public health research in India in a way that rather than presenting my results in an academic journal that maybe only a few people would read, I wanted to disperse them through some kind of media platform where a lot more youth would be able to consume my findings and benefit from them. And so I worked with a media partner who made youth empowerment content. They had a YouTube channel and a short form series channel. And I traveled with them all around India. We conducted interviews about mental health with students at 100 different universities over the course of a year. And my conversations with students there made me really care about educational equity because I found that the messaging about mental health and the importance of it would resonate really well at universities where students already had access to information and awareness of those topics, but they would fall on mute ears and areas where students hadn't had the same privileges. So I left that experience really wanting to build educational equity from the ground up as a way to promote public health. So I settled on transitioning from academia into the edtech sector. I work for a private nonprofit, and the reason why edtech interested me is because it has a reach that transcends international boundaries. I see it as a form of education that really promotes equity because the quality of your education isn't determined by the zip code or country that you live in. And I see it as being very sustainable because no matter which direction curriculums or education takes or how countries diverge, edtech can forge forward and keep students' best interests in mind. So I work for Khan Academy. It's a nonprofit and it's the world's largest absolutely free edtech platform. It actually started as one guy who made YouTube videos tutoring people in math and science. And in about 12 years, it's grown into a global platform, which now has 140 million users across 190 countries and with content in 50 languages. And we deliver entire curriculums from preschool through 12th grade in all the core subjects, core college subjects, test and professional prep like the SAT, MCAT, and LSAT. And in addition to being translated into 50 languages, we have full content curriculums for India, Brazil, and Peru, in which the content is localized to local education standards. So here's a graphic of our region countries. This is from 2018, but it actually increased significantly during the pandemic because we were one of the edtech platforms preceding that pandemic that was best equipped to meet a global need for virtual education right away. And here's an example of some of our content with Khan Academy India. We communicate science concepts across languages, and we try to localize the curriculum so that the examples given and the curriculum standards align to what's needed in the education system in the country. So my role at Khan Academy is as a communication strategist. I work on content strategy, not for just the educational videos, but for the digital community building aspect. So I manage Khan Academy social media. Here's an example of one of our social media pages. So I really love my job because I get to use different languages. I get to talk about science, and I also get to make memes. I also work on our podcast and coordinate with news channels to share updates about international education. So my main objective in my job is to acquire more learners to access our free resources around the world, and then to engage those communities, not just in our education resources, but in a community around learning to build more awareness about the importance of learning. And I do that by sharing a lot of learning science best practices, mental health tips, and just community connecting activities online. I also help to localize our content so that the content we make for India resonates with an Indian audience, the content we make for Brazil resonates with a Brazilian audience. I also help coordinate translation of our content, which is done entirely by volunteers who we call language advocates. And I also manage our partnerships. We partner with school districts in every state in the US. And since COVID, we not only teach online, but we partner to teach schools in person. And I partner with other nonprofits and corporate partners. So here's an example of some of the work that I've done engaging my language skills and just my general communication skills at Khan Academy. I help strategize our podcast where we work with other thought leaders in the education space, and also just like to deliver inspiring messages that get more people to be excited about free education. And here's an example of the reach of the content that I create. Most of the content that I make is in English, but as you can see, we have a huge audience in India, and I'm able to strategize content to share with our Indian team that works well with those audiences as well. Same with Pakistan. And though we don't have as much usage in Central Asia, I'm working to build up our library there using my Farsi experience. So how language skills have played a role in my career. The direct and hard skills are that I use my language to manage our digital community in India. I actively engage and comment with Indian Urdu speakers online about troubleshooting. I have familiarity with the Indian education landscape, having conducted research there and being able to use those insights to make content that really supports students and especially the mental health struggles of students in India, and a deeper understanding of the user experience from the student perspective. Supporting our Indian content team with strategy ideas. And one of the parts of my job I'm most proud of is right now we're working to expand our Persian, Farsi, and Dari content libraries to make education available to girls in Afghanistan who are currently barred from education. And also, as I mentioned earlier, helping coordinate translation of science and other content to other languages. But soft skills, I would say, are just as important. Like I said, most of the content I create is in English, but that doesn't mean that the time I spend learning language doesn't apply every single day. So I would say that my international experience from my study abroad and my language studies is a huge asset. Having worked in an Indian office and knowing Indian office culture, it really helps me to collaborate much better with my colleagues in India. Having deep experience of conducting interviews with people in the field and the language has helped me to connect with my online community and do the same thing remotely from the US. And understanding international media landscapes, being able to respond to trends, being able to monitor media in different languages to make sure that our content gets seen by the right people. And I think one of the most important aspects is also the ability to tell a story. So I don't meet too many people in this language learning field who end up going into the creative field, but I would definitely say that having consumed and created content across languages, that the process of learning really helped me to be able to craft an impactful narrative and one that drives more impact in my job. And that also applies to my own professional story and applying for jobs and applying for grants, being able to highlight which aspects of my experience will translate well into a new role, even if it's a little bit of a career pivot. And also in being able to think about problems at scale. So I would say that my experience, especially studying abroad and learning multiple languages, helped me think about not only how I can improve public health and education outcomes in the US, but how I can use my platform and my job to try to tackle that issue for the whole world. So here's why I think language skills are a real asset to the edtech industry, which is growing. As we all saw during COVID, there was a sudden huge demand for educational technology as a way to continue education for millions, billions of students around the world who suddenly didn't have access to schools. And as the world goes further in this direction, it's only going to become more important that we have the continuity of those resources. Another reason is the changing education and labor market in the US, with more immigrants coming into the country and in preparation for more refugees to come throughout the climate crisis. It will be important to have curriculums adapted to students in their own languages so that they can transition and not lose out on their education. And I also believe that the future of education will be more globalized. Eventually, there will be educational institutions that aren't necessarily determined by national boundary. And so building the skills to help localize content, I think, is a great asset for anyone in this language learning community to build so that they can be prepared for a career, whether it's in the private or the public sector. So ways to get involved. There are careers at Khan Academy, but I also want to put in a plug for anyone to consider the edtech field if they are interested in academia. It provides a lot more not more opportunities, but different types of opportunities that I hadn't considered before when I was on the pathway of strict academia. Another way to get involved is you can volunteer with Khan Academy as a language advocate. That's when you translate our content into languages for different countries. And you can also volunteer with Schoolhouse.world, which is another offshoot of our organization, to tutor students in other countries in academic content, including math and science and other subjects. And so I wanted to share some final tips for a career in using your languages. And if you're interested in education or edtech as a landscape, I would say pursue every language learning opportunity that you can, even if you're not sure that your personal story fits the academic or public sector mold. As a born scholar, I was really hard set on joining the government sector after I graduated, and I was actually about to take a government job before I got this role at Khan Academy. But looking into the private sector opened my eyes to more opportunities for the way that these skills can be used. And because Khan Academy is an education nonprofit, it will even satisfy my born service requirement if anyone else is in the same field of needing to satisfy that kind of obligation. And I also want to say that edtech is one of the fastest growing and most relevant industries as we prepare our world to be more adaptive to crisis situations. So I would definitely keep an eye out whether you want to go into edtech or whatever your area of interest is, whatever academic subject, look into the ways that edtech is starting to play a role in that field. And I would also say, as you start your language learning journey or continue it, keep a detailed portfolio of your projects, be it a blog, photography, any media, making guest articles, even engaging with like media in the host country that you study abroad in. If you can write a guest column on a newspaper, I would say that paper trail of the work that I did was a huge asset in me finding a good job using my language skills. And I also want to say that even if you change languages as I did, or your target language isn't the primary language of your job, the soft skills that you pick up through the learning process will always apply. So don't stop learning and don't be deterred to take a pivot to follow in the direction of your passion. So thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at my email, which is just julie@myacademy.org.
Thank you, Hailey, for the fantastic presentation. Our next presenter is the Associate Director of the Institute for Regional International Studies at the National Resource Center. And he's also the Director of Arabic, Persian, and Turkish Language Institute. Csanád Siklós manages and oversees the programming of IRIS-NRC and serves as the Program Director of APTLE. Prior to joining IRIS-NRC, he held positions in the Institute for Regional and International Studies as Assistant Director for Students and Curriculum and Academic Advisor for the International Studies major, and in European Studies as Assistant Director. He has considerable experience in the field of language learning, having previously been lecturer in Norwegian at UW-Madison and a private consultant, editor, reviewer, and translator for the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, Rosetta Stone, and University Language Services. He received his bachelor's in German and Norwegian from University College London. He holds a master's and PhD in Scandinavian Studies from the University of Washington. Csanád speaks native Hungarian, fluent Norwegian, and German. So take it away, Csanád.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It's good to see you. So I was asked to talk about my career pathway 2 days ago for this panel. So I'm not sure I've quite got the brief right, but I'll give this a go. So I was asked to talk about my career pathway and how my foreign language knowledge may have played a part in that. I should preface all of this by saying that I'm a British citizen and a US permanent resident. So you will hear about work I've done both here and in the UK, where language skills were required or desirable. But this is really sort of incidental. I don't think this makes much of a difference where this is happening. The first thing I should say is that I'm a heritage speaker of Hungarian. My parents were refugees who settled in England, and I'm a Londoner, born and bred. We spoke Hungarian at home, where we spoke Hungarian with some friends, and at Hungarian community events and gatherings. I spoke English with a Hungarian accent until I started school, and I've never taken formal Hungarian classes. In secondary school in London, I had my first opportunity to study a language. I took French and Latin to O level and German to O and A level. If you know Harry Potter, you'll understand the English education system. O being ordinary level, which you take when you're about 16, and A levels are you take when you're about 18, and they are the entrance exams to university. I then applied and was accepted to University College London for a joint honours BA degree in German and Scandinavian, with Norwegian as my chosen language. I knew nothing about Norwegian at the time. What I wanted was to be able to study a language properly. Secondary school language instruction was maybe not the highest quality. I studied abroad in Norway twice and in Austria once. On my second trip to Norway at the end of my third year, I met some American students who at some point, it came up in conversation, mentioned graduate programs in the US and the system of teaching assistantships, which was I was unfamiliar with. We certainly don't have those in England. So I applied to the Scandinavian department at the other UW, or rather UW, the University of Washington in Seattle, and was accepted onto their MA PhD program in Scandinavian Studies. I received my MA and then completed PhD coursework, and with only my dissertation to write, I managed to get a position as lecturer in Norwegian here at UW-Madison. At that time, this was a fixed term 3-year position to teach all levels of Norwegian language and to teach Norwegian literature. At this point, I should perhaps say that I didn't really have a clear sort of career goal. I sort of assumed I would become a professor. And this turned out not to be the case. After the 3 years, I was unable to find a teaching position in the US and returned to the UK, where I spent the year working on my dissertation and applying to any relevant professorship around. there really weren't any. This was I don't know, maybe there's never been a good time for academic positions. I was also applying to random jobs in London, for which I was considered overqualified because they saw that I had an MA and was working on a PhD. So my first point relates to this. I'm not sure I should be saying this actually, but universities are businesses or factories with a production line. And every year, more and more students at whatever level are graduating, and there is this real competition for jobs. As a PhD student, you may not get that plum professorship you were dreaming of. And as a graduating undergraduate, what sets you apart from all those other graduating undergraduates? I would argue that this is language skills and your global competence, among some other transferable skills. Pre-pandemic, I used to attend the Madison International Trade Association's events, and repeatedly what I heard from people engaged in international business was their need for recent graduates with language skills. They were not specifically looking for business school graduates. They needed those language skills. So back to me. There I am. Okay, I'm in London with no job. I'm on the dole. I have a friend who works at the London School of Economics at the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences, an indexing and abstracting service. It's an academic bibliography, who tells me there is a vacancy for an entry-level editor and I should apply. I found the listing back in those days. It would have appeared in the Wednesday Guardian media supplement section of the paper. What the International Bibliography of the Social Sciences was looking for, believe it or not, was for someone who knew Scandinavian languages, who knew some German, and who could translate Hungarian. Again, they didn't need knowledge of social sciences. What they needed was language knowledge. I feel very fortunate that this job came up. I worked at IBSS for a total of 9 years, moving to assistant manager after 2 years, and then a year later I was made manager. As manager, I was responsible for hiring new editors for these entry-level editorial positions. Usually editors stayed for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Turnover was really quite high, partly because they were entry-level positions. And we tried to develop their skills so that they could then move on to other generalist or editorial work. I can say that our first priority when hiring was identifying applicants with the requisite foreign language skills. We learned the subjects on the job. What we couldn't learn, obviously, were the languages that we needed. Over the 5 years I was manager there, we probably hired over 30 editors, all for their language skills. You may have noticed that I said it was a friend who told me about the job vacancy. This brings me on to my second point. I didn't know at the time that what I was doing was networking, or that I was getting a job in part through my network. For other reasons, I moved back to the States in 2005, and I assumed that UW-Madison would absolutely leap at the opportunity to hire me in some administrative management position, 9 years as a manager. Some of my former colleagues in the Scandinavian department had warned me, however, that competition was fierce and really difficult to get your foot in the door. So then this other door opened. I'd started to do some freelance work, so editorial and translation, because I wasn't working otherwise. And one day when I was home working, actually on a Mr. Bean sticker and activity book for children. So I was at home and the mailman knocked on the door and asked if I could take delivery of a package for my neighbor who I didn't know. I said yes. That evening I took the package to the neighbor, who turned out to be a graduate student in the Scandinavian department here. So we started talking about things. She was finishing up her MA and had been offered a job at Rosetta Stone in Virginia as an editorial manager, based in part upon her language skills. Shortly after she arrived in Virginia, she contacted me. Rosetta Stone was wanting to create a British English version of the language program, and wondered if I would be interested. This is still freelance, by the way. I signed contracts as an editor, as a reviewer, and as an audio reviewer, and eventually even did some voice work in a recording studio. Most of the work was remote, though I did also work on site, which was quite eye-opening. Now, at some point over the phone, she told me, this is probably about 6 months into my work with Rosetta Stone, she told me that there had been some upheaval at Rosetta Stone related to the German language program. The editor had left and had left the program full of errors and very behind schedule for publication. So mentioned in passing that if she needed help with it, that I did possess enough German knowledge. She said thanks, but no thanks. But a week later, she called me and said, on second thoughts. So I started working on German as well. On and off throughout this time, and up to today, I will get contacted to ask if I can do some translation work, either for private individuals or for academic departments or translation services. That's how I ended up translating for a UW professor of sociology a few years ago, who was working with the Hungarian Academy of Sciences on a major educational survey project. Again, it was the language they needed. Anyway, while working for Rosetta Stone, I was also applying for jobs. 70 rejection letters I kept for a while and then threw away eventually because it's bad feng shui to keep negative messages, I was told. And then out of the blue, I was contacted by a former colleague in the Scandinavian department. So here we go, my network again. She was and still is professor of Swedish here. She asked if I was happy freelancing, Mr. Bean, or was I still looking for a position on campus? She had just become faculty director for European Studies, and there was a vacancy for the assistant director position. Ultimately, sometimes it's not what you know, even if it is language, but who you know. Admittedly, I knew her because I knew Norwegian, but still, sometimes that's more important. The position was a perfect fit for me. I ran outreach programming to K-12 educators and students about Europe, advised students in our European Studies certificate, and was the FLAS coordinator for European Studies. And I was able to use my language knowledge at various times, working with language programs overseas, meeting with guests of European Studies. We had the chair of the Nobel Prize, Norwegian Nobel Prize Committee come. We had Hungarian journalists come to our office, and the German funding agency. I worked there for 9 years before moving to a newly created position as Assistant Director for Students and Curriculum at the Institute for Regional and International Studies, basically curricula and student services. And as of last year, I took the role that I'm currently in, and I was also asked to become Program Director of the Arabic, Persian, Turkish Language Institute. So I'm not really sure if I've ever had a career pathway, or if I did, it was certainly not a straight line. It seemed often to have been defined by accident, coincidence, chance meetings, and yet there is a thread, I think, here, that of language. The circuitous nature of the path brings me to a final point, and that's the possibility that you will need to be flexible about career choices. You may not initially start off where you want to be, or you start something that develops into something else. Finally, I wanted to give maybe 1 or 2 anecdotes related to my advising of international studies majors and European studies certificate students. One was related to the private sector, the other to education. Both these students were actually studying French, but the language of study was less important here. So we had in European studies an undergraduate student, Hailey, an IS major, who had spent a year in France studying and had advanced French language skills. As he approached graduation, he was offered a job in international sales at Epic in Verona here. I assumed this would be related to maybe working with French-speaking customers. He said no, it was for working with Sweden primarily. Epic had selected him because of his international experience, his study abroad, and proven language and communication skills. So that's what he told me. The second student was our peer advisor in international studies in her senior year. She had also spent a year in France studying and had advanced French skills. Here's that chance thing again. At the end of her senior year, the IS major advisor resigned. we asked this new IS graduate who just graduated if she would like to stay on as a temporary interim advisor while we got the job search going. She stayed and then applied for the position and got it. She is now an award-winning academic advisor, recognized for her work by the Office of Undergraduate Advising and chair of the LNS Advisor Consortium. So I think I will finish, I'll stop there. Was I very short? Do I have more time? Do I need to talk more? Matthew?
Sorry, Daryl was still on mute. I am briefly taking over from Matthew just to let everyone know thank you again for your presentations, Elise, Hailey, and Csanád. And I did want to open up the floor to questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. If you have any difficulties putting questions into the chat, please just direct message them to either myself or Elise, and we can start some questions. And if we are looking for some questions, we have some ready as well. So again, feel free to put in some questions into the chat or to message us with some questions and we'll read them up for the group. All right, I guess while you are thinking about questions, I did have one, if you don't mind, and maybe that is out to the group. But since Csanád, you most recently spoke, I was just wondering, in your line of work currently, are there any less commonly taught languages that are highly sought out for their language skills that you can see in your work with students and the different majors that you advise or support for?
I'm going to have to say Arabic, Persian, Turkish, seeing as I'm the director of APLI. I mean, these are critical languages. In fact, all of the languages that IRIS-NRC supports with FLAS awards and other awards are critical languages and significant or global or security languages. So in addition to the APLI languages, we do support study of Korean, Indonesian. You're putting me on the spot because I'm going to forget one. Swahili, a couple more. I honestly can't remember them at the moment. But I mean, ultimately, I think it's something that Alfred Ball said as well. It doesn't matter which language you're studying. There is a space and a niche for you. But yeah, that's what I would say. And I'm trying to think of Turkish. No, it's Turkish. Anyway.
All right, thank you. We did have a question come in. Do you know of any funding opportunities for less commonly taught languages, in particular for Kazakh, for conducting individual projects? If anyone could touch on that. Thank you.
Well, it sort of depends. I mean, I didn't mention that. So all of my graduate work was over here in the States. And as an international student, I didn't have funding opportunities available for me in that way. Kazakh is certainly a FLAS language. So students can apply to study Kazakh on a foreign language and area studies fellowship. That would be run probably through the Center for Russia, East Europe, and Central Asia here.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I had applied for a program through the Eurasian Regional Language Program that funds individual student research projects, and you don't have to be actively enrolled in a university. And you can also apply for Title VIII funding to study at ERLP, which is another federal grant targeted at Eurasian languages. And I think Kazakh is on their list.
Also, I think for individual researchers who are kind of postgraduate students, you can also kind of again, think about creative outlets. So for example, National Geographic funds different projects that are related to different ethno-linguistic projects. The different anthropology. So if you're kind of taking more of an anthropological linguistics approach, we'll fund different types of projects. You can also think about different types of intersectional identities. So if you're a female academic from different parts, different regions, et cetera, thinking about applying for funding that focuses on capacity building of scholars from like a particular region. So certainly there are different types of grants and scholarships that are focused on building expertise among Central Asian researchers. So it might not specifically be language oriented or linguistics oriented, but it could be grants that are really for Central Asian scholars. Like an example of that would be the Civil Society Scholars Award that the Open Society Foundation used to run, but that scholarship or that fund is no longer open. It's a sunsetted program, but things like that. So kind of thinking a little bit creatively about not just kind of maybe language or linguistics funding outlets, but also thinking about what are funding agencies that fund people with different types of intersectional identities.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for their thoughts on that. We did have a question come in for anyone who has translator experience. So to be a professional translator, one should obviously have high proficiency in the language. Are you familiar with any opportunities that speakers with only maybe intermediate ability could apply for to kind of get their foot in the door?
Anyone going to answer that one? I just think I'm struggling a little bit. A lot of, I've never done this, but generally, I think you're supposed to register yourself as the American Translation Association. You should be a member of it. So I don't know, if that's feasible. I think probably starting privately might be a way. Most of the translation work that I've done has been sort of just private on the side, and I've sort of made up whatever the fee should be for a translation service based on what I think the American Translation Association charges. But that's probably the best way, is just get yourself out there on LinkedIn. I did get contacted not that long ago by a former European Studies certificate student who's now working for a translation company. And he emailed me saying, I think I remember that you spoke Hungarian, and we don't have anyone in the office who can do it. And so he passed it on to me. But put it on your LinkedIn profile. Start there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, probably related to that question, but Hailey, earlier you mentioned opportunities to be language volunteers for Khan Academy. What do the requirements for that look like? Because that's a volunteer position, but I am assuming that they probably also require pretty high level of proficiency.
Yeah, I can speak to that. For the most part, you do have to have at least advanced proficiency, but there are also like content reviewers who are there to make sure, who are native speakers who are there to review the quality of the translations. So the application process is that you apply, you share your translation and language experience, if any, and I think there's like a little written language exam or like an opportunity for you to share samples of your language work. And they use that to determine whether or not they think your skills are suited for translating that content. Another thing I would add is that it is translation of different subjects of academic material like math and science. So for a lot of people, some of that vocabulary is a little difficult, but they do have like content banks and glossaries for different academic terms there to help the translators. So if you're worried about that being a barrier, there are resources to help you build up that vocabulary.
Great, thank you. We do have a question that came in for LCTL speakers that are searching for jobs. Is it, in your opinions, is it likely that they could find more jobs using generic keywords such as like language or bilingual, or would they have better results using like the specific language that they are hoping to get a job in, or their language skills? So for example, like Turkish or Russian.
I can start and maybe others will have something to add. I did most of my job search on LinkedIn, looking both for government sector and private sector jobs. And what I did was set up like a keyword alert for jobs in the public sector. And I put the keyword of like communication strategist, and I did both. I would put like Hindi, I would put South Asia as a keyword, like regional affairs specialist. So I think if you're using LinkedIn, you can set up alerts for both. And then if you're lucky, you might find a job that ticks more than one box.
Anything else from the group?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, I think it's, you know, start broad and then narrow down. I mean, the thing that our keynote speaker said as well is like, think of all the transferable skills that come with your language knowledge. So start broad and see where you go. But
that's a good point. I think when I was trying to find jobs that were related to languages, I think I had to give up really quickly the notion that it would be in my hometown or anywhere close. I think it also can, you may need to be a little flexible with where your ultimate location will be, just because sometimes these jobs can be pretty few and far between, and you may need to go relocate to a bigger city or more international hub that might have the language or department that you're looking for, or serve that region in the private sector. So that was my personal experience. And I also did like keyword search like that too. But yeah, just want to pause if there's any questions anyone had from the group here.
Just to chime in, I think one thing that was helpful for me too was to one, kind of just reach out to different people who had jobs that I thought were really interesting, and in a low stakes kind of way, asking to have kind of a cold cold call interview, or kind of a information gathering type of interview with them, just to learn about what they were doing, and then asking them even for suggestions regarding, different places that you could apply, or that I could apply, or kind of recommendations for different outlets, different organizations, regional organizations, et cetera, also have networks and listservs and newsletters and postings and stuff about what's coming up on the job market as well. And so I think also proactively reaching out to people to not only ask about their jobs, but also kind of ask for recommendations and expand kind of the information that you have. I mean, that the one has was a kind of a strategy that was really helpful for me as well. So kind of proactively touching base with people, et cetera, faculty members, people in industry. Not everybody will respond, but it never hurts to try.
Yeah, I certainly did several of those sorts of informational interviews or information gathering interviews when I was struggling to find work.
All right, maybe one last call of sessions, and if not, we may break early and go to the main session. All right. Well, again, I want to thank our amazing panelists, Elise and Hailey and Csanád. It was been great to hear about your firsthand experiences and kind of maybe some of the roundabout ways that we get into the positions that we're currently in using less commonly taught languages, and that may be the norm. All the varied paths that we take. So again, thank you everyone, and we will be posting the recordings and emailing out those and other resources afterwards. So again, thank you. And anyone who'd like to pop into a different session or main session, feel free to do so. If you need help doing so, just DM us and let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.